Summer of 1884. Behind the Iron Creek Saloon in the dust of a Wyoming town called Redstone, a 4-year-old girl was reaching into a garbage pail. She pulled out a piece of biscuit gone hard and grey at one edge. She broke it in two with the precision of someone who had done this before and handed half to her twin sister standing behind her. But what stopped the tall man 6 paces away in the alley shadow was not 2 small children eating from the trash. It was what the smaller sister did next. She chewed slowly. Then she reached into her own mouth, took out a portion of what she was eating, and placed it carefully into the small pocket sewn at the front of her dress. She was 4 years old, and she was saving food for later because she had learned that there was no later that came automatically. Later had to be earned. Later had to be planned for. What Wyatt Calder did in the next 60 seconds would unmake 5 years of silence and set him on a road that ended with a sheriff in iron cuffs and a letter from a dead woman he was never meant to read. The summer of 1884 had teeth in Wyoming, and the town of Redstone was caught between them like a man who had forgotten how to pray. The heat came off the red dust streets in waves that bent the air and made the Bighorn Mountains in the distance look like a painting somebody had tried to wash off and given up on. Dogs lay in the shade of porches with their tongues out and their ribs showing. The horses at the hitching posts shifted their weight from hoof to hoof like men in a long line waiting for bad news. By 2 in the afternoon, the main street was almost empty. The saloon doors swinging open and shut with the breath of the prairie, and behind the Iron Creek Saloon, in the long shadow of the kitchen wall, a child was reaching into a garbage pail with the careful concentration of a woman setting a table for company. Her hand came out with a piece of biscuit gone hard and gone grey at one edge, and she held it for a moment in the flat of her palm, the way a person holds something fragile examining it. She was no taller than the bottom of the saloon window. Her dress had once been blue. It was the color of old ash, now the color of a campfire 3 days cold, and the hem of it was torn in a way that suggested no mother had touched it in months. Her bare feet were dark with dust to the ankles. Her hair, dark brown, hung in 2 uneven braids her own hands had made. She broke the biscuit in 2 with the precision of someone who had done this before. She put one half into her mouth. The other half she held out without looking, and another small hand came forward from behind her shoulder and took it. There was a second girl, the same height, almost exactly the same dark hair, the same dress, in the same dust. They were twins. Her sister chewed slowly the way a person chews when there is not very much and there will not be more soon. And then she stopped chewing and she reached into her own mouth and took out a portion of what she was eating, and she placed it carefully into the small pocket sewn at the front of her dress. She was saving it. She was 4 years old and she was saving food for later because she had learned that there was no later that came automatically. Later had to be earned. Later had to be planned for. 6 paces away in the alley shadow, a man stood watching them, and he had not moved in almost a full minute. His name was Wyatt Calder. He was 54 years old. He stood 6 feet 4 inches in his boots, and the build under his work clothes was the build of a man who had earned every pound of it on the open ground, not in any town. His shoulders were broad and solid. His arms, where they showed below the cut sleeves of his work shirt, were heavy and brown from the sun, and the hands at the ends of them were the hands of a man who had worked with rope and leather and the cold iron of horseshoes for the better part of 40 years. His beard was dark brown going silver at the chin, and the line of the jaw kept but not vain. His hair under the wide brim of his cream-colored hat was damp at the temples. His eyes, when he turned them toward you, were the color of a knife blade left out in the rain. Steel gray, quiet, the kind of eyes that watched a thing all the way to the end before they said anything about it. Wyatt Calder had not wept since the morning they lowered Eliza into the frozen ground at the cemetery in Cheyenne. 5 years of silence. 5 years of walls built so thick and so high that the Almighty himself could not have pushed a finger through. He had arranged his life around the goal of being left entirely alone. He came into Redstone 3 mornings a week, Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday. He bought what he needed without unnecessary conversation. He collected his mail without reading it until he got home. He was back on the road to his property before the main street got busy enough to require him to tip his hat at anyone. It was a system. It worked. He had not deviated from it in 14 months. He was deviating now because the heel of his right boot had split that morning on the road into town, and he had stopped at Garvey's saddle shop on the south end of Main Street to have it nailed back on, and the simplest way home from Garvey's ran behind the Iron Creek Saloon. At a time of day, Wyatt Calder was almost never on this part of the block. He had heard them before he had seen them, not crying. That was the first thing that registered as wrong. There was a sound like small concentrated effort, the sound of work being done quietly by people who had learned that noise did not produce results. He had come around the corner of the saloon's back wall, and he had stopped, and he had not moved since. The smaller of the two girls put the back half of her biscuit into the pocket of her dress, and she looked up. She saw him. For perhaps a quarter of a second her face did nothing at all. Then the older sister, the one with the half-inch advantage in height, turned her head slowly, the way an animal turns when it has heard something behind it, and she saw him too. And what happened next was the fastest motion Wyatt Calder had seen in a long time. The older girl spun her body and put herself directly between her sister and Wyatt Calder. One hand went out behind her, closed on her sister's wrist. She did not speak. She did not yell for help. She simply stood there, 4 years old, the size of a fence post, and she put the whole frame of her body between the man in the alley and the only other person in the world she had left, and her eyes, dark blue, came up to his face and stayed there, with an attention that was not childlike at all. It was the attention of a creature that had learned the hard way that strangers represented a specific category of danger and that the appropriate response was sustained surveillance until the nature of the threat became clear. Wyatt Calder lifted both hands away from his body, palms open and out where she could see them. He bent his knees and went down slowly so he was not looming. "Easy now," he said. His voice came out quieter than he had used it in a long while. "I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to take anything that is yours." Neither girl spoke. Neither girl moved. He felt something happen in the center of his chest that he had no name for. It was not pain exactly, though it lived in the same neighborhood. It was more like the sound a beam makes when the weight on it finally exceeds what it was built to hold. He reached very slowly into the inside pocket of his vest. The older girl's eyes followed his hand the entire way. He brought out a small paper packet, no bigger than the palm of a child, and he set it on the dirt between them at arm's length. "Cheese," he said. "It is not much. It is yours if you want it. You do not have to come close to me. I will move back." He moved back. He went 2 slow steps backward toward the alley wall and lowered himself the rest of the way down until he was sitting in the dust, which he figured was less threatening than crouching. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the smaller sister, the one with the half biscuit in her pocket, said something so quiet he almost did not hear it. "Are you a good man, mister?" He looked at her. She had eyes the color of pale prairie sky after a storm has come through and washed everything clean. Her face was thin. Her cheeks had a smudge of dust on them and a tear track that had dried hours ago. "I do not know any more, little one," Wyatt Calder said. "But I will try to be." The older sister looked at him a long second. Then she stepped forward and snatched the paper packet off the ground in a motion so fast he barely registered it. And she stepped back to her sister's side and she broke the cheese exactly in half before he had finished blinking. She handed one half behind her without looking. The smaller sister took it. "My name is Wyatt," he said. "Wyatt Calder. What are yours?" The older girl said nothing. "Tess?" said the smaller one around her cheese. "I am Tess. She's Junie." "Tess," Junie said. It was not a scolding. It was a warning. The first word the older girl had spoken. "He gave us the cheese," Tess said in the same flat, reasonable tone she had used before. He can know our names. Mama said names are for people who give, not for people who take. Junie looked at her sister for a long moment. Then she looked at Wyatt Calder, and she did not say her name herself, but she did not contradict it either. And Wyatt understood in that moment that he had been allowed across a small line of country he had not earned the right to cross. He intended to honor it. "Junie," he said, "Tess, I am pleased to make your acquaintance." He did not ask them where they lived. He did not ask them about their mother and father. He did not ask them anything else at all. He stood up slowly, brushed the alley dust off the back of his trousers, and he tipped the brim of his cream-colored hat to them, the way he would tip it to a grown woman in a doorway. "I will be back tomorrow morning," he said. "I will leave something better than cheese on that crate yonder. You do not have to see me if you do not want to. I will not be watching for thanks." He walked out of the alley without looking back, because looking back would have meant he needed something from them, and he did not. He had given a thing, and the thing was theirs, and that was the end of it. He walked the 4 miles home through the July heat, and he did not eat his supper that night, and he sat at the kitchen table in his small house at the edge of Redstone, with the photograph of his late wife in one hand and his own quiet in the other, and he thought about what people are made of, and what a 4-year-old child has to go through before she learns to put food away in a pocket against the next time hunger comes. What people had told him before he stopped listening to them was that grief like his was a cup. You drank from it, and one day the cup was empty, and you were a man again. The people who told him that had not been married to Eliza Calder. He had married her in 1862 in a little stone church outside Laramie when he was 32, and she was 27, and she had taken his rough working hand at the altar with the grace of a woman who had just been given the only thing she had ever wanted. They had not been able to have children. They had wanted them. The doctor had told her after the second loss that it was not going to happen for her in this lifetime, and Eliza had walked out of that doctor's office and stood in the autumn sunlight on the boardwalk and put her hand on Wyatt's chest and said, "Then it will be you and me, my love, and I will love you enough for any children we did not get to have." She had done that. She had loved him exactly that much, every single day for 17 years. In the winter of 1879, while Wyatt was in Laramie, hearing a land dispute case for the territorial court, Eliza had taken a fever. By the time the rider reached him with the news, she was already 3 days gone. He had ridden the 80 miles back through a January blizzard, and he had not gotten there until they had already prepared her for the ground, and he had not been allowed to see her face one last time, because the doctor said the fever made her not herself at the end. Wyatt Calder had stood at the graveside in Cheyenne on a morning so cold the priest's words came out as plumes of white, and he had not cried. He had not cried at the wake. He had not cried at the supper afterwards. He had not cried in the long empty house where the lavender Eliza had kept in her dresser drawer was still in the dresser drawer, because he could not bring himself to open it. He had served out the rest of that year on the bench. He had resigned his position as Justice of the Peace in the spring of 1880. He had moved to a small piece of land outside Redstone in 1882, 2 years before this story finds him, because Cheyenne had Eliza in every street, and Redstone had nobody he had ever loved in any of its streets, and that was easier. He had told himself that the man who had loved Eliza Calder so well was buried in that frozen ground beside her, and what walked away from that grave was something else, something thinner, a man who would do the daily work of being alive, but would not make the mistake of caring about anything ever again. He had believed that almost completely until 2:30 the previous afternoon. He looked at the photograph of his wife in his hand, the small portrait taken in a Cheyenne studio in 1875, and he saw her looking back at him with that small private smile she had worn only for him, and he heard her voice as clearly as if she had been standing in the kitchen behind him. "What kind of man are you going to be tomorrow, Wyatt Calder?" He set the photograph down on the table. He stood up. He walked to the cupboard and took down a tin of salted pork and a half loaf of yesterday's bread and he wrapped them both in clean cloth, and he set the cloth bundle by the door for the morning. "I do not know yet, Eliza," he said aloud to the empty house, "but I am thinking on it." He was at the alley behind the Iron Creek Saloon at 6 the next morning, which was earlier than the town was awake. He left the bundle on the wooden crate where he had pointed the day before. He added 2 boiled eggs from his own hens. Then he walked across the alley and positioned himself behind the rain barrel of the saddle shop on the opposite side, and he waited. For 40 minutes, nothing happened. Then the 2 girls came down the alley from the direction of the abandoned tannery on the east end of town, and they moved through the pre-dawn light the way water moves through a channel, quick, purposeful, taking up as little space as the world would allow them. Junie first, Tess directly behind her, one small hand wrapped in the back of Junie's dress. They moved as one organism with 2 sets of eyes. Junie found the bundle on the crate. She stopped a full arm's length away and examined it without touching it for a length of time that felt long for a 4-year-old. Then she looked up, and her eyes swept the alley with the systematic attention of a person checking exits, and her gaze passed directly over the rain barrel where Wyatt Calder was positioned, and her gaze did not stop. He could not tell if she had not seen him, or if she had seen him and decided to pretend she had not. She picked up the bundle. She opened it. She divided everything with the same mathematical precision he had seen the day before. 2 equal portions of bread, the salt pork broken across the middle, 1 egg for each. She handed Tess her share first and waited until Tess had a firm grip before she let go, and then Junie looked across the 15 feet of alley between them and looked directly at the rain barrel where Wyatt Calder was hidden. She held his gaze for a count of 3. Then she sat down on the crate and began to eat her breakfast as if he were not there at all. She had known he was there the entire time. Wyatt walked home that morning with that knowledge sitting in his chest like a small warm coal, and he did not know yet what to do with the warmth of it, and he did not try to know. He came back the 3rd morning and did not hide. He stood 15 feet from the crate with his hands at his sides and his hat pushed back on his head and his rifle deliberately left at home, which was the first time in 2 years he had walked into Redstone unarmed. When the girls came down the alley and saw him, Junie went into that total stillness. He was beginning to recognize the muscular alertness of a child who had learned that stillness is the first response and movement comes only after assessment. "Good morning," Wyatt said. "I left more than yesterday on the crate. It is yours. I will stay right here." Junie took 1 step forward, stopped assessed. "You can take it," he said. She walked to the crate, keeping her eyes on him the way a chess player keeps track of the most dangerous piece on the board. She unwrapped the package, divided it past Tess her half. Tess sat down in the dust with her food and ate. "Is there a place you go at night?" Wyatt asked. "Somewhere you sleep?" Junie looked at him. She chewed. "Old barn," Tess said. Junie made a sound that was almost her sister's name as a warning. "He feeds us," Tess said to her sister with the tone of a person presenting a logical argument. "He can know about the barn." Junie considered this. Then she looked at Wyatt. "Behind the tannery," she said. Her voice was lower than her sister's with a roughness to it from disuse. "The back part where the roof is still good." "How long have you been there?" A pause. The 2 girls looked at each other. Something passed between them in the fast, wordless language of twins, something Wyatt could see but not read. "Long time," Junie said finally. "Since the spring. And there is no grown person staying with you?" "No," Tess said. Junie's jaw tightened, but she did not contradict her sister. "Were your mother and father from Redstone?" Junie set her bread down on the crate. She looked at Wyatt with those 2 old eyes and she said, "They are gone." "Gone how?" Junie picked the bread back up. She looked away. "Just gone." It was not an answer. It was also not nothing. Wyatt stood in the alley with the morning light coming through the gap between the saloon and the saddle shop in long gold bars across the dust, and he thought about a 4-year-old child who had been sleeping in an abandoned tannery since May, and he felt the temperature of his own quiet slowly start to change the way the air changes before a thunderstorm comes in over the bighorns. He went to see Mabel Carver that afternoon. The laundry sat at the far end of Main Street. Mabel Carver ran it alone from 5 in the morning until the light gave out, which meant she was always there and always had her ears open, because a laundry in a small frontier town was where the information accumulated along with the dirty shirts. She was a solid woman of 58 with forearms that looked like they had been made for harder work than Wyoming had yet offered her, and eyes that did not miss much. She looked up when Wyatt came in. "Wyatt called her," she said. "You need something washed or you need something told to you." "There are 2 little girls," Wyatt said. "Twins, dark hair, about 4, you know them." "You..." Mabel's hands, which had been moving with the automatic efficiency of 20 years of practice, went still on the washboard. "I know who you mean," she said. "Who are they?" She looked at him. Then she picked up the shirt she had been working and went back to the board, and she did not look at him while she spoke. "Their name is Mercer," she said. "Father was Silas Mercer. He worked the upper claim on the ridge above the Drummond Cut. Mother was a woman named Hannah, came from Iowa originally. Quiet woman, kept to herself. They had those 2 little girls about 4 years ago, June of 1880 if I remember. Named the older one Junie for the month." She scrubbed. "They died back in the spring," she said. "Mining accident is what Sheriff Thorne said. Silas Mercer and 2 other men went into the lower shaft and the supports gave way, sealed them in. And the mother," Mabel's scrubbing slowed. "Hannah Mercer died 2 weeks later. Dr. Holloway said it was grief, said her heart gave out." She did not look at Wyatt when she said this. "Closed casket. Said the body was not in a condition for viewing." Wyatt stood with that for a moment. "And the girls, nobody claimed them." Mabel's voice had gone flat in the way of a person reciting facts they have had to make peace with. Silas had no family in the territory. Hannah's people were back in Iowa and either could not come or did not. Sheriff Thorne said arrangements would be made to send them to the county home in Cheyenne. She paused. "That was 4 months ago." "They are still here," Wyatt said. "I know they are still here," Mabel said. "You leave food out the back of the laundry. I have seen the path." It was not a question. He had walked around the side of her building that morning and had seen the worn path through the weeds. Mabel's hands stopped moving. She turned and looked at him straight. "I put bread out," she said. "I am not going to apologize for it. I am not asking you to. I want to do more. I want you to understand that. But Thorne runs this town, Wyatt. He runs everything in it. And if you start asking questions about those girls, about why they are still here 4 months after he said he would handle it, about why their mother's death certificate was signed by a doctor who has been drinking himself into uselessness since that same spring." She stopped. "People who ask those questions in Redstone do not generally find the answers comfortable." Wyatt looked at her. "Tell me about Thorne." Mabel went back to the washboard. She scrubbed a long while before she answered. "He has been sheriff here 6 years. Came up from Colorado with references from people high enough up that nobody questioned them. He has never raised his voice that I have witnessed, never lost his temper publicly. Always has a kind word and a tipped hat." She paused. "He has bought up 6 properties in this valley in the last 2 years, all of them from families that had some kind of misfortune right before they sold. Mining accidents, fires, sicknesses that came on sudden." She looked at Wyatt over her shoulder. "Silas Mercer's claim was one of the richest in the area. Everybody knew it. Silas knew it. He had been talking to a surveyor from Denver about the real value." She set the shirt aside and started wringing it. Silas Mercer was dead inside 2 weeks of that surveyor's visit. She had not yet finished the sentence when the door of the laundry opened, and the small bell above it gave a soft, polite ring, and Sheriff Asa Thorne stepped inside. Mabel did not jump. The ringing of the shirt did not falter. Wyatt admired her for that. Arthur Thorne was tall and well put together. He had the quality of grooming of a man who thought carefully about how he appeared to other people. He moved through the small laundry the way a man moves when he is accustomed to owning the space he occupies. Easy, unhurried, smiling. "Mabel," he said. He took his hat off the way a gentleman does when he comes indoors. "Mr. Calder." He made the name sound like it tasted slightly unfamiliar in his mouth. "Sheriff," Wyatt said. "Forgive the intrusion," Thorne said. "I came to ask Mabel about a shirt of mine that came back missing a button last week. Such a small thing, but I am particular about my shirts." "I will look for the button this afternoon, Sheriff," Mabel said evenly. "I would be obliged." He turned the brim of his hat in his hands once. His eyes came to rest on Wyatt. "Mr. Calder, I have been hoping to run into you. I hear you have been taking a different route home of late. Boot heel split. Had to go to Garvey's." Of course. The south end of town has its merits in summer. Quieter behind the saloon at midday." He smiled. It was a good smile, the kind that almost reached the eyes. "I only mention it because there are 2 little strays who have taken to that area. Mercer girls. Sad situation. I have been working on placement for them in Cheyenne. These things take time, as I am sure you remember from your years on the bench." "I remember," Wyatt said. "You would not be feeding them, would you, Mr. Calder?" The temperature in the laundry did not change. Thorne's voice did not change. His smile did not change. "I would not want them encouraged to stay in Redstone living rough," he said. "Children get attached. Townspeople get attached. It makes a clean placement so much harder when that happens. For everyone." Wyatt held his eyes. He had spent 11 years on a bench looking at people who were lying to him and learning to give nothing away while he did it. "I have not done anything," Wyatt said, "that would complicate your arrangements." It was an honest sentence, shaped like a wall. Asa Thorne looked at him for 1 beat longer than the conversation required. "Good man," he said. He put his hat back on. He tipped the brim to Mabel and he said, "I will be around for that button, Mabel." And he stepped out into the heat of the street. The bell above the door gave its small, polite ring. The door closed. Mabel Carver did not speak for almost a full minute. When she did not look at Wyatt. She kept her hands moving on the shirt. "Wyatt, listen to me. He has never raised his voice at any soul in this town. That is exactly what makes him dangerous. A man who screams at you wants you afraid. A man who smiles at you while he tells you what to do has already decided what happens to you next." She wrung the shirt out hard. "You go see Dr. Holloway. Today, before the light goes. You tell him I sent you. Tell him it is time." He went. The doctor's office was on the 2nd floor of the apothecary building, and the staircase was a sufficient deterrent to casual visitors, which Wyatt suspected was why Dr. Ezra Holloway had increasingly arranged his life on the 2nd floor. He was 62. He looked 70. His hands had the slight fine tremor of a man who had been steady on whiskey for too long. His eyes went to the window whenever a conversation reached a certain depth. "Mercer girls," Wyatt said when he had sat down across from Holloway without being invited. "Their mother. You signed the death certificate." Holloway looked at the window. "Heart failure. Common enough after severe grief. The body responds to loss in ways that—" "Dr. Holloway." Holloway stopped. "Mabel Carver sent me," Wyatt said. "She said to tell you it was time." Holloway closed his eyes. He sat that way for a long count. When he opened them, they were wet, and his voice had the texture of a thing that had not been spoken aloud before and was now coming up out of its hiding place because the man who had been hiding it could no longer carry it alone. "Hannah Mercer came to me," he said, 3 days before she died. She was not sick, she was frightened. She said she knew who was responsible for what happened to Silas. She said she had papers, documents Silas had been keeping, a pattern of payments from a land company in Cheyenne to specific men in this county, a pattern of land transfers that followed a pattern of deaths. He swallowed. She asked me to keep them safe. Wyatt waited. I said no. Holloway's voice went flat. I said I was a doctor, not a lawman, and that what she had needed to be taken to someone with authority. I told her to be careful on her way home. He stared at the window. She was dead 2 days later. Sheriff Thorne was at my door the morning after her death before the news of it had been around the town. He stood in my doorway with his hat in his hand, and he asked me very politely whether Hannah Mercer had said anything to me in her final visits that I ought to share. He looked at Wyatt for the first time since he had started talking. The way he asked me, the way he stood there. I told him she had said nothing of consequence. I signed the certificate as he requested. Heart failure. His hands were shaking visibly now. The children were in the house when she died, Wyatt. Those 2 little girls. They were in the next room. The room was very quiet. The papers she brought you, Wyatt said. What happened to them? Holloway reached into the bottom drawer of his desk with an unsteady hand, and he produced a flat brown envelope, sweat creased and edge-worn from wherever it had been kept. He placed it on the desk between them. He did not touch it again. I told myself I would burn them, he said. I told myself a dozen times. I could not. Wyatt picked up the envelope. He did not open it yet. He looked at Holloway, at this man who had made a terrible choice and had been living in it for months. She trusted you, Wyatt said. That mattered. It is going to matter more before this is done. He stood. He put the envelope inside his vest against his ribs, where his heart was now beating in a way that he had forgotten his heart could beat. Dr. Holloway, do not mention this conversation to anyone, not yet. He will know somebody is asking Wyatt. This town tells him everything. He has ears in every building on this street. Then I will be careful about what there is to hear. He walked back down the stairs and out into the late afternoon heat of Redstone's main street, with Hannah Mercer's evidence pressed against his ribs, and he took the long way around the block, so he did not have to pass directly in front of the sheriff's office. And as he came up Main Street toward the post office, Asa Thorne stepped off the boardwalk in front of him and stopped him. Wyatt, Thorne said. He smiled. I keep running into you today. Small town, Wyatt said. I hear you visited Dr. Holloway. Bad knee, old injury from my bench years. He gave me something for it. Good of him. Thorne let his eyes rest on Wyatt's face for a long, even moment. You were a justice of the peace in Cheyenne, were you not, Wyatt? 11 years. I was. Your wife was a fine woman, I have heard. Eliza, I believe. Wyatt did not answer. Fever, was it? In 79. You were on circuit when she went. The street which had been quiet became quieter. That must be a heavy thing to carry, Wyatt. Not being there. Thorne smiled. The smile did not change. I would hate for a man to make the same kind of mistake twice, to not be there when somebody needed him. He tipped his hat. He stepped past Wyatt and walked on down the street. Wyatt Calder stood very still on the boardwalk in front of the post office for almost a full minute after Asa Thorne was gone. His hands were at his sides. His face was calm. The thing moving through his chest was neither of those things, and it stayed where he kept it. He walked home the long way, taking 3 unnecessary turns along the route, and he confirmed by the second turn that there was a man in a brown coat half a block behind him keeping a distance. The man followed Wyatt to within sight of his property. The man stood at the end of the road for almost 20 minutes, and then the man left. Wyatt fed his horse. He ate a piece of bread because he had decided he would eat. He sat at the kitchen table with Hannah Mercer's brown envelope and his late wife's photograph, and he did not open the envelope because the envelope was going to require a kind of attention he wanted to give it correctly. He went to bed with his rifle within reach, but not where he could grab it fast. He slept. He did not notice until morning the small object that had been placed on the kitchen table while he slept. A single flat stone river, worn with a cross scratched into its surface with the point of a nail or a knife, set in the exact center of the table beside Eliza's photograph. Every window was latched. The door showed no mark of entry. Wyatt Calder picked up the stone and stood with it in the early kitchen light, and he understood with a certainty that settled into the marrow of his bones that two children, no taller than the bottom of a saloon window, had gotten into his locked house. In the night left him a message, in a language he was just beginning to learn to read, and gotten out again without waking him. He set the stone on the table beside Eliza's photograph. He stood there with his coffee going cold in his hand and the kitchen quiet around him, and he thought about what kind of man he intended to be from this morning forward, because he understood that the choosing was no longer going to be optional. He went into town that morning earlier than he ever had. He found them at the crate behind the Iron Creek Saloon. Junie was sitting on top of it with her bare feet dangling. Tess was standing beside her. There was on the corner of the crate a small object. He went down on one knee in the dust and picked it up. It was a brass button, plain, the kind that came off a working man's coat, small enough to fit in a child's palm, placed there on purpose. Wyatt looked at Junie. "You were in my house last night." Junie chewed the inside of her cheek. "We needed to know if you were safe," she said. "How did you get in?" "Back window," Tess said without looking up from a piece of bread. "The latch is loose. You should fix it." "I will do that." He crouched down so he was at their level. "You know," he said, "you are taking a considerable risk walking around at night in this town." "We know about night," Junie said. "It was not a boast. It was a fact." She looked at him steadily. Her dark blue eyes had that quality he was coming to recognize, the careful grown-up assessment underneath a face that was still a child's. "You sleep with your rifle close, Mr. Calder, but you put it where you can reach it, not where you can grab it fast. Men who are scared put it where they can grab it fast. You are not scared, you are careful. That is different." Wyatt Calder, 54 years old, former justice of the peace of the Wyoming Territory, knelt in the alley dust behind a saloon and stared at a 4-year-old girl who had just delivered a more accurate analysis of his character than anyone had managed in 5 years. He felt something in his chest do something it had not done in a very long time. It was not pain. He cleared his throat. He looked at Tess. Tess looked back at him and reached up without any apparent ceremony and put her small hand into his large one and held on. It was not a tentative gesture. She just took his hand the way a child takes the hand of a person they have decided is theirs. Matter of fact, complete. Her hand was very small. He felt the bones of her fingers. He held on with a steadiness he made himself maintain because the alternative was not acceptable. "Your mama," he said gently, "left a box for you, did she?" "Under the floor," Tess said. "In the kitchen. She said," Junie said carefully, "that if anything happened, we should find a man who was safe and we should show him where the box was." She was looking at him. "We have been waiting," she said, "since May." The kitchen was a long way away. The kitchen was at a house outside of town that 2 men of Asa Thorne's were almost certainly watching by daylight. The kitchen meant going at night. The kitchen meant trusting. "All right," Wyatt said. "Tonight, after the dark comes. Will you take me there?" Junie looked at her sister. The fast wordless language passed between them. Tess gave one small nod. Junie turned back to Wyatt Calder. Her chin came up the precise 1/4 inch that was her version of a decision being made. "Tonight," she said, 9 o'clock, we will meet you here." She held out her free hand. He looked at it, and after a moment he understood, and he reached out and took it. They shook on it formally the way 2 grown people shake on a contract they intend to keep. It was the first time he had touched Junie Mercer. It would not be the last. The sun was already coming up hot over the bighorns. The town was beginning to wake. Somewhere out at the end of Main Street a door opened and closed, and a man's boots came down on a wooden step. Wyatt Calder, kneeling in an alley with 2 small hands in his, understood that whatever he had been before this summer was not coming back, and that whatever he was about to become had already started. What he did not understand yet, as he walked the 4 miles home in the rising heat, with the brass button in his vest pocket and the carved stone in his coat, and the brown envelope still pressed against his ribs, was that Sheriff Asa Thorne had spent the previous evening making his own decision, and that the man in the brown coat who had followed Wyatt home the night before had been only the first of 3 men Thorne intended to put on him by the end of this week, and that on the kitchen floor of the Mercer house beside the loose board that hid Hannah Mercer's tin box, there was a second envelope sealed that Hannah had written in her last shaking hand on the night before she died, addressed not to a marshal or a doctor or a lawman, addressed to whoever in the providence of God came to find her children. Wyatt Calder did not know yet that the envelope was there. He would before the moon set the next night, and the words inside it would do what 5 years of frozen ground in a Cheyenne cemetery had not been able to do. They would bring him back. The day passed slowly, the way important days always do, the kind of waiting that wears a man down in the joints before he has done a single useful thing. Wyatt Calder spent it the way he spent every day in Redstone, which was the only way he could spend it without inviting questions. He bought a sack of cornmeal from the general store. He had a haircut from the barber, which he had been putting off for a month, and which gave him an honest reason to sit on Main Street for half an hour with his eyes open. He read a week-old copy of the Cheyenne Territorial Gazette on the bench outside the post office. He nodded at the men who nodded at him. He did not look toward the Iron Creek Saloon, and he did not look toward the laundry, and he did not look toward the apothecary stairs. He let Redstone see exactly the man it had grown used to seeing, the quiet widower from the property at the edge of town, who came and went on his Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays and bothered no one. Inside his vest against his ribs, Hannah Mercer's brown envelope kept a steady warmth. By 6 o'clock, the heat had broken into the long gold light of a Wyoming evening. By 8:30, the streets had gone quiet. He left his horse at the livery the way he sometimes did when he meant to ride home late, and he walked the long way around the block, and at 3 minutes before 9 o'clock, he stepped into the alley behind the Iron Creek Saloon. They came out of the dark from a direction he was not watching, which he was beginning to understand was something they did on purpose. "He had a man follow you again today," Junie said. "No greeting, straight into the report. After you left the barber, brown coat same as before, followed you to the post office, sat across the street for 30 minutes. I know. You did not turn around. Turning around tells him you saw him. I did not want to tell him anything yet." Junie considered this. Some small thing in her face shifted. She took her sister's hand and Tess took Wyatt's, and Wyatt understood, without being told, that this was how the line of 3 of them was going to walk through the dark of Redstone tonight. "This way," Junie said. They moved through the back ways of the town and out along the creek road, and Wyatt paid careful attention to how they moved, because there was something instructive about it. They never walked through open ground when a tree line was available. They stopped at intervals to listen in a way that was so habitual it clearly was no longer conscious. When a dog started barking at a property they were passing, Junie changed their angle without breaking stride, taking them around the far side of the noise in a wide arc before returning to the original direction. These were not things a 4-year-old learned by being taught. These were things a 4-year-old learned by surviving long enough to figure them out on her own in the cold, in the dark, with a smaller sister at her back. Halfway along the creek road, Tess stopped without warning and turned and pointed at a cottonwood in a small grove 10 feet off the trail. "There," she whispered. Wyatt went over. He went down on one knee in the soft river dirt and looked at the bark, and his breath caught. Carved into the cottonwood at the height a tall man could comfortably reach were 4 names. Not deep, not fancy, done with the careful, patient hand of a man who loved his family and did not have many ways to say so out loud. Silas, Hannah, Junie, Tess. He laid his palm flat over the carving. The wood was warm from the day's sun. He felt the grooves of the letters under his hand, and he felt for one long moment as though he had been allowed to shake hands across a year and a death with a man he had never met. Silas Mercer, a man who had stood in this grove with a knife in his hand and put the 4 people he loved into a tree on purpose, in case the world ever needed to be reminded that they had once existed all together in one place. He bowed his head. He did not weep. The thing inside him that wept had come unfrozen the night before, but it had not yet learned how to do it freely, and so it stayed inside. "Mr. Calder," Tess said softly. "Yes, little one. Papa wanted his name to stay." "Then it stays," Wyatt said. "I promise you, it stays." Junie was watching him. He could feel the watching. "Come," she said. "We are close." The Mercer house stood a mile outside of Redstone in a small fold of land where a creek ran past a stand of cottonwoods. Half the roof had come in after a spring rain. The front porch sagged. The barn was empty. But the kitchen wall was still standing, and the door when Junie pushed it opened with the soft complaint of hinges that remembered being opened by other hands. Junie went straight to the kitchen. She did not need light. She knew the boards by feel. She crouched down and her small hands found a seam that Wyatt would not have been able to find in daylight with a lantern, and she pried up a section of the floorboard with a flat piece of metal she produced from the pocket of her dress. She kept tools in her pockets, the way a carpenter kept a belt ready. He set his lantern down. He went down on one knee beside her. In the cavity beneath the board sat a tin box about the size of a man's boot, and beside it, almost tucked under the joist, sat a sealed brown envelope. Wyatt lifted them both out and set them on the kitchen table that was still standing dust thick across its surface. The tin box he opened first with hands that were steadier than he would have expected. Inside were papers, many papers, folded, labelled in a careful hand, a small ledger book bound in cloth, a separate set of receipts. He did not yet read them all. He saw enough by the lantern light to know exactly what Silas Mercer had built and to know why a man would die before letting it fall into the wrong hands. The sealed envelope was a different matter. It had been written in a hand that shook. The ink was unsteady. The address on the front said in plain, unhurried letters, "To whoever by the providence of God comes to find my children." He held it for a long moment. Then he set it carefully aside on the table untouched. "This one is not for me," he said. "Not yet. This one we read together, the three of us, when we are somewhere safe." Junie was watching the envelope the way a person watches a candle they are afraid to blow out. She nodded slowly. It was at that moment that they heard the horses. 2 riders, coming up the creek road, not fast, not slow. The deliberate pace of men who had been told to look and not to hurry. Wyatt was on his feet before he had finished registering the sound. He blew out the lantern. "Out the back," he said low, "into the trees." He scooped up the tin box under one arm and the envelope into his vest, and he had Tess against his hip in the next motion, and Junie had already started for the back door without being told, because the children of dead parents in dangerous towns do not wait for instructions twice. They went out the kitchen door and across the yard and into the cottonwood grove behind the house, and they crouched down low in the dark of the bracken, and a half-minute later 2 men rode into the front yard of the Mercer place. They dismounted. They went into the house. Wyatt could see the bob of their lanterns through the broken windows. They were searching. One of them, the larger one, walked into the kitchen and stopped where the floorboard was still pried up. He stood looking at it for a long moment. Then he raised his lantern and walked through the kitchen and through the small parlor, and he came out onto the front porch and stood there listening. He could not have heard anything. The night was still. The creek ran. The cottonwood leaves whispered. The second man came out and joined him on the porch. "It is gone." "He has been here." "Recent. The dust is disturbed." The first man was quiet a long moment. "Sheriff is going to want to know." "Yes, he is." They mounted up. They rode away. Wyatt waited a full 10 minutes after the sound of the hooves had died into the prairie before he let his breath out. Junie's small hand was wrapped in the back of his coat. Tess was pressed against his ribs. Neither of them had made a sound. He looked down at the smaller girl in his arm. Her eyes were enormous in the dark. "Good girl," he whispered. "You did not make a peep." "Mama said," Tess whispered back, "the brave thing and the quiet thing are the same thing." Wyatt Calder closed his eyes for a moment. "Your mama was right," he said. They walked back to Redstone the long way through the high grass beside the creek, and they did not speak. He left the girls at the corner of the abandoned tannery, with strict instructions, his voice low and unarguable. "You stay inside that barn tonight. You do not come out for any reason. Not for food, not for me, not for anyone. If anyone you do not know comes to that barn before sunrise, you go out the back the way you went out tonight, and you run east into the cottonwoods, and you lay down and you wait. Do you hear me?" "We hear you," Junie said. "I will be back at first light. You will know it is me because I will whistle 2 notes, like this." He showed her very softly. "Anyone else who comes to that barn you do not trust, even if they say my name." Junie nodded once. Tess reached up. He bent down. She put her small arms around his neck and held on for the count of 3. Then she let go, and she went into the barn behind her sister, and the dark of the doorway closed over them. He walked home through the night, with the tin box under his arm and Hannah Mercer's sealed letter in his vest, and he did not take the road. He took the long way around through the brush. He let himself into his own house through the back. He lit 1 lamp. He sat down at his kitchen table. He read for 4 hours. What Silas Mercer had documented in the months before his death was methodical and precise. The record-keeping of a man who had understood that if anything happened to him, the evidence was going to have to speak for itself, because there was not going to be anyone left to explain it. Property transfers, dates, amounts, a pattern of mining accidents and sudden illnesses that preceded each sale by no more than 3 weeks. Names of men in this county who had received payments from an account held by a land company based in Cheyenne. Payments in amounts that corresponded to the timing of specific deaths. Sheriff Asa Thorne's name appeared 11 times. A territorial senator named Whitfield Beaumont in Cheyenne appeared 9 times. A territorial judge named Lemuel Crane appeared 4 times. The last entry Silas Mercer had made was dated 2 days before the accident in the lower shaft. It read in a careful, even hand. "If you are reading this, I am most likely dead. Do not take this to anyone in the Redstone County system. Do not use the county telegraph. Take this to United States Marshal Garrett Halloran in Cheyenne. His office is on Clement Street. He is the only man in this territory I have been able to confirm is clean. Tell him the name Silas Mercer. He will know me." Wyatt sat back in his chair. He read the last paragraph twice. He knew the name Garrett Halloran. He had known him a little by reputation in his bench years. A careful man, slow because he was correct. The kind of federal officer who did not do a thing twice when once done right would hold. He understood now what Silas Mercer had been doing in the last weeks of his life. He had been distributing pieces of his case across people he trusted, so that no single person knowing all of it would mean the whole thing died with one person. Maybelle had been told the name Halloran. Dr. Holloway had been given the documents. Hannah had been told where to hide the box. Each piece kept somewhere different. Each piece survivable. It was the thinking of a man who had understood exactly what he was up against. It had survived him. It was on Wyatt Calder's kitchen table now. He put his face in his hands for a long moment, not weeping, only resting. "All right, Eliza," he said quietly to the empty kitchen. "I am paying attention now." He went to see Maybelle Carver at first light. She answered her door at 6 in the morning with a look that said she had been awake for a while, and was not surprised to find him on her porch. "I figured it would be you," she said. She stepped back and let him in. Her kitchen smelled of coffee and clean linen. She poured him a cup without asking, and set it on the table and sat across from him. "I need to get to Cheyenne," he said, "and I need to do it without Thorne knowing I have gone, and I need someone here in Redstone to keep an eye on those 2 girls while I am traveling. What is in Cheyenne?" "Federal Marshal Garrett Halloran." Something moved in Mabel's eyes, not surprise, recognition. "Silas mentioned that name to me," she said quietly, "back in February, before he died. He said if anything ever happened to him, and I needed to reach somebody clean in the territorial system, Halloran was the name. He was thorough." "He was scared," Mabel said, "and thorough because he was scared. There is a difference." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "I will watch the girls, but Wyatt, you need to understand. If Thorn comes asking about those children while you are gone, I can only hold him off so long. He has been patient because he believed the problem would solve itself. Hungry children in an abandoned barn in a Wyoming summer either leave or they do not survive it. Either outcome removes them without him having to do anything visible." She paused. "But if he figures out the documents are gone from that house, the patience ends." "I know," Wyatt said. "That is why I am leaving today." He saddled up and was on the south road out of Redstone, before 7, taking the creek trail that ran parallel to the main road, but sat lower in the valley and was screened by cottonwoods for most of its length. It added 40 minutes to the route. It was worth 40 minutes. He made 8 miles before he saw the rider. The man came out of a draw to his east at a pace that was slightly too purposeful for coincidence, angling to intercept rather than moving parallel, and Wyatt pulled up and waited. Running told a story he did not want to tell. He wanted to see the man's face before he made a decision. It was not one of Thorn's deputies. It was a young man, 25 at most, in traveling clothes, riding a bay horse that had hard miles on it, and his hands were visible and away from his body, in the way of someone who wanted to make clear that he was not reaching for anything. "Mr. Calder," the young man said when he had closed the distance. He pulled up 10 feet away. "My name is Wesley Trent. I am a correspondent for the Cheyenne Territorial Gazette." He reached very slowly into his coat and produced a calling card which he extended without moving his horse forward. "Mabel Carver sent me after you. She said you would take the creek road and that I should tell you the coffee is getting cold, which I am told you would understand." It was a phrase Mabel used when she wanted somebody to move faster. She had said it to Wyatt twice before, both times when he had been overthinking something that required action more than consideration. He looked at the young man's face, and he read it the way he had read faces for years from a bench, and he found nothing in it that suggested performance. "What do you know about Thorn?" Wyatt said. "Enough to know he has killed at least 4 men in this valley in the last 2 years, and called all of them accidents." Wesley Trent's voice was steady and a little tight, the voice of someone who was scared and had decided to be there anyway. "I have been in Redstone for 3 weeks. I have been building a parallel record, property transfers, dates, witness statements from families who sold under duress. I have testimony from 2 men who worked the shaft the day Silas Mercer died. They do not believe it was an accident. They are afraid to say so publicly. Their names: Obadiah Boone and Tobias Avery, both still in Redstone. Both have families. Both told me what they saw on the condition that I never identified them unless there was a federal proceeding where they could testify with protection." Wyatt looked at him for another long moment. He thought about Silas Mercer parceling out his evidence across the people he trusted. Mabel, Holloway, the Mercer house, and apparently this young newspaperman who had ridden into Redstone on his own to start putting the picture together from the outside in. "Ride with me," Wyatt said. They rode together in silence for an hour before Wyatt spoke again. "How did Mabel know I was going to Cheyenne?" "She said you were the kind of man who identified a problem and moved toward it. She said the only place you would have reason to go was Cheyenne, and the only person you would be going to see was Halloran." "She knew about Halloran." "Silas told a lot of people," Wesley said. "He was careful about it. He only told each person one piece of the picture. Mabel knew about Halloran. Dr. Holloway had the documents. I had the witness names." He paused. "I think he did it deliberately, so that no single person knowing everything meant the whole thing died with one person." "It did not die," Wyatt said. "No, sir," Wesley said quietly. "It did not." They were 4 miles outside of Redstone when Junie stepped out of the tree line directly into their path. Wyatt's horse shied. He brought it around and looked down at her, and his stomach dropped. She was alone. "Tess is in the trees," Junie said quickly before he could ask. She was holding her chin at the high quarter inch, the place she put it when she was containing more than her face could comfortably hold. "She is all right. Her feet are bad. We had to walk fast." "You were supposed to stay at the barn." "Men came," Junie said. "2 men, before sunrise. We got out the back before they got inside, but they know about the barn now." Wyatt was already swinging down from the saddle. "Where is she?" Junie put 2 fingers in her mouth and gave a small whistle. 2 notes descending, and Tess came out of the cottonwoods almost at once, which told Wyatt that she had been close enough to hear everything and had been waiting for that exact signal. Her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had not been there yesterday. The cloth had been torn from the bottom of her dress and bound with the careful efficiency of someone who had done improvised medical work before. There was blood on the wrappings, dried. He went to one knee in the dust of the trail. He took her small face in his calloused hands very gently. "Hello, little one." "Hello, Mr. Calder." Her voice was steady. Her chin was trembling. He picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her back to his horse and set her in the saddle, and Junie put her foot in the stirrup and swung up behind her sister before he could offer a hand. "Hold on to her," he said. "I have her," Junie said. He looked at Wesley Trent. "Thorn moved faster than I expected. He must have had men watching the barn since the day I started bringing food." "He has men on the south road too," Junie said. "We saw them from the ridge when we were following you." Wyatt looked at the trail behind them. He looked at the sky. He calculated. Thorn had moved to cut the south road, which meant he knew or strongly suspected Wyatt was running, which meant somebody had talked, or somebody had seen him leave, or Thorn was simply thorough enough to seal the obvious exits as a matter of course. "Is there another way out of this valley?" Wesley asked. "2, Wyatt said. "The North Pass adds a full day and goes through country where Thorn has mining operations and men on payroll. And the canyon route east of the ridge, which I surveyed 8 years ago for a mining company, that went under before they could use the survey." "Do you know it?" "I knew it then. Most of it is still in my head." "Is it passable?" "It is passable. Wrong turn in the debris field, and you are either against a rock wall or in a gully that drops 40 feet. Junie looked down at him from the saddle. "I can help Mr. Calder. Bapa taught me how to read a wash." Wyatt looked up at her. "He did he?" "Smooth rocks on the safe side, sharp rocks on the danger side. Things that fall from above land on the sharp side. The smooth side is what gets walked on." He stood looking at her in the bright morning light, this 4-year-old child on a tall horse with her hands wrapped around her sister's middle, citing geological sense her dead father had taught her in case one day she would need it, and he understood with a clean, cold certainty that Silas Mercer had been preparing his children for exactly this morning. "All right," he said, "then you and I will read the canyon together." They went east off the creek trail and up into the broken country that climbed toward the ridge. Wyatt walked his horse. Wesley rode alongside. The terrain required attention. The canyon entrance lay 3 miles up and 1,000 feet of elevation gain, and by the time they reached the first of the rock formations that marked the approach, Wyatt's lungs were reminding him that he was 54 years old and had not climbed this particular hillside in 8 years. He ignored them. Lungs had opinions. This was not the time for opinions. He stood at the mouth of the canyon and looked in and let his memory work. "There," he said after a moment. He pointed into the rocks. "The debris field starts about 50 yards in. We stay on the left wall and follow it north. There is a section where the path looks like it ends at a rock fall. It does not. We go up and over the left side of the pile, not around it. The right side drops away." "How far through?" Wesley asked. "About 2 hours, maybe less. It comes out onto the eastern plain, and from there it is open country to Cheyenne. The main road runs about 5 miles south of the canyon exit. And Thorn's men do not know this route. It is not on any county map. The records are in Denver if anyone has ever looked. Thorn has had no reason to look. Until now, They went in. The canyon was everything he remembered. Close, disorienting. The walls pressed in with the specific pressure of enclosed spaces that made the back of the neck prickle. Wesley's horse moved uneasily, and Wesley kept a low hand on its neck, murmuring to it in the continuous low way of a man who had ridden anxious horses before. Wyatt's horse with Tess and Junie on its back moved with a steadiness that surprised him, as if the weight of them had settled the animal into something calmer than its usual disposition. Junie navigated the canyon the way she navigated everything. From the saddle she watched the walls and the ground ahead with an attention that was absolute and unsentimental. "Left here," she said quietly twice, and both times Wyatt checked her against his memory and found she was right. "Not that way." "How are you doing that?" Wesley asked her the second time, not with skepticism, with the genuine wanting to know of a man who was being taught. "The smooth side," Junie said again, patient with him. "It is what gets walked on." Wesley looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked ahead and did not smile. They were an hour in past the rockfall, past the worst of the narrow places, moving through a wider passage where the walls gave them 20 feet of space on either side, when they heard the sound behind them. Horses, more than one, not close, but in the canyon, which meant at the entrance or near enough that the echo carried. Wesley looked back. Wyatt kept his eyes forward. "Do not stop," he said. "Move." He found the entrance. He found the entrance. Wyatt calculated in his head. The difficult sections were behind them. The wrong turns were behind them. Anyone following who did not know the route would have to slow down at the debris field. They had time. They had to move, and they had time, but only just. Tess made a small sound in the saddle. Not a cry, just the quick involuntary breath of a 4-year-old child who was tired and frightened and had decided not to show it and had not entirely succeeded. Junie pressed her chin against the top of her sister's head. "We are almost there," she said softly. "How do you know?" Tess asked. "The air is starting to smell different. When you are close to the other end of a canyon, the air smells like the open." Tess was quiet a moment. "You make things up," she said, "when you want me to stop being scared." "Sometimes, yes." "Are you making it up now?" "No, baby, not now." Wyatt walked his horse forward through the close canyon air, and he listened to the two small voices behind him, and he felt something move through his chest that was not grief for once, and was not purpose exactly. Something quieter than either of those. The particular feeling of a man who has been trusted with something irreplaceable and who intends to be worth that trust if it costs him everything he has. The walls began to widen. The light changed. The air changed. They came out of the canyon into the late afternoon light on the eastern plain, with the sound of horses still behind them in the rock, still muffled by distance, still not close enough to matter. Wyatt stopped his horse at the canyon mouth and looked back at the dark behind them and forward at the open country stretching east toward Cheyenne, and he breathed. "We are through," Wesley said. He said it like a man who had not been entirely sure they would be. "We are through," Wyatt confirmed. He looked up at the two girls on his horse. Junie was looking back at the canyon mouth with the careful assessment of a person noting that a situation had moved to its next stage. Tess was leaning back against her sister with her eyes half closed, the exhausted lean of a small child who had been holding herself upright through willpower alone and was finally allowing some of it to go. He reached up and put his hand on Tess's small ankle very lightly, just to let her know he was there. "You did well," he said. "Both of you. You did real well." Tess opened her eyes. "Are we going somewhere safe now, Mr. Calder?" He thought about what safe meant. He thought about Garrett Halloran in his Cheyenne office, and about Silas Mercer's documents sewn into the lining of his coat, and about Obadiah Boone and Tobias Avery back in Redstone, who had seen what they had seen and were afraid to say it, but who, with the right kind of protection behind them, might say it anyway. "We are going somewhere," he said, "that can make us safe. It is not the same thing yet. but it is the right direction." Tess nodded with the gravity of a child who had learned not to accept easy comfort and was willing to work with honest answers. She leaned back against her sister and closed her eyes again. Wesley looked at Wyatt. "Thorn will be out of that canyon in under an hour if he knows the route. Then we do not stop for anything. The girls—" "We will manage," Junie said from the saddle with a finality that closed the subject. The way only Junie could close a thing completely and without room for appeal. Wesley looked at her. He looked at Wyatt. He nodded the nod of a man who had updated his understanding of the situation and was adjusting accordingly. Wyatt put his foot in the stirrup and swung up behind Junie and Tess, taking the reins gently around them so that the three of them rode the one horse together. And Wesley turned his bay alongside, and they moved east into the fading afternoon light, away from the canyon mouth, away from Redstone, away from Sheriff Asa Thorne, who was at this exact moment somewhere in the rocks behind them, riding hard, finding his way wrong twice for every right turn he found falling further behind with each mistake. The sun went down over their left shoulders slow and red. The first stars came out hard and bright over the eastern plain the way they did at this elevation. Wyatt Calder, with two small sisters asleep against his chest, and the truth of their family pressed into his ribs, rode toward the lights of Cheyenne with the strange, uncomfortable, undeniable weight of a man who had been given something worth fighting for, and who had in the dark of his own kitchen the night before last finally stopped arguing with what he knew to be real. Behind them, somewhere in the rock, Asa Thorne was cursing. Ahead of them, somewhere in a federal office on Clement Street, a marshal who had once known Silas Mercer was about to have his afternoon interrupted by a knock at the door he had been waiting 4 months to hear. Tess shifted in her sleep and made a small sound. Junie tightened her hold on her sister automatically, without waking. Wyatt watched the road ahead and rode on. By the 3rd hour east of the canyon, the moon had come up cold and white over the prairie, and Cheyenne was still 60 miles away. Wyatt Calder navigated by the stars the way he had navigated by them 20 years ago when he was younger, and the stakes were smaller, and the people depending on him were fewer. Wesley Trent rode on his left and did not talk much, which Wyatt appreciated. The young man had turned out to be the kind of person who understood when silence was more useful than conversation, which was a rarer quality than it ought to have been in a newspaper man. Junie fell asleep first, somewhere around the 2nd hour of dark riding. Her head dropped forward against the back of Tess's small shoulder, and her grip on her sister's middle went slack in the specific way of children whose bodies had finally overridden their will. Tess stayed awake longer. He could tell by the set of her small shoulders that particular uprightness of a child determined not to be the one who gave in first. Then Tess's shoulders dropped too, and both of them were asleep against him, leaning into each other with the absolute unconscious trust of two people who had been each other's only constant for so long that the boundary between them had worn thin. He kept the horse moving at the easy traveling pace of a long night ride, walk and trot and walk again, the steady working rhythm a man learns when he needs to cover distance without breaking the animal under him. He thought about Silas and Hannah Mercer, who had raised these two children and taught them to divide food equally, and read canyon walls, and navigate by landmarks, and trust carefully, and survive absolutely, and who were gone now in the way the best people always seem to go too fast and for the worst reasons, leaving behind them the evidence of who they had been in the people they had shaped. These girls were that evidence. All the love Silas and Hannah had put into the world was riding around in 2 4-year-old persons who saved food in their pockets and tracked men through cottonwood draws and fell asleep holding each other on a horse in the middle of the Wyoming dark. It was not nothing. It was in fact everything. Wyatt Calder, 54 years old, a man who had spent the last 5 years of his life trying to need nothing and protect nothing and risk nothing, rode through the dark with 2 small heads against his chest, and felt the walls he had spent those 5 years building come down quietly inside him, one by one in a way that was not painful at all. He thought for the first time in a very long while that Eliza would have approved. He thought she would have liked these girls. He thought, watching the road ahead in the starlight, that maybe that was a kind of permission. They stopped once before dawn at a creek to water the horses and let the girls stretch and eat from the provisions Wesley had packed. Tess ate with her eyes still half closed, the automatic hunger of a child whose body had learned to take food whenever it was available, regardless of the level of consciousness. Junie woke up the way she did everything completely and immediately and looked around to establish where they were before she did anything else. "How far?" she asked. 15 miles, Wyatt said. "We will be there by mid-morning." She nodded. She ate. She looked at the dark horizon to the east, where the first grey was beginning to suggest itself. "Will the marshal believe you?" she asked. "He will believe the documents. Documents do not have a reason to lie." "People say documents lie all the time," Junie said. "Sheriff Thorne had documents about Bapa's death, about Mama. He had official papers saying they died the way he said they died." She looked at him directly. "How will the marshal be different?" "Those are the kind of documents," Wyatt said carefully, "that get made to cover something up. What your father made is the kind that gets made to uncover something. Halloran will know the difference. It is his job to know." Junie was quiet a moment, turning that over. "And if he does not?" "Then we go higher. There is always somebody higher. We go up the line until we find the one who is clean. Your father knew that. That is why he documented everything so carefully. He was building something that could survive being handed from one person to the next until it reached someone who would act on it." Junie looked at the lightening horizon. "He was smart," she said. "He was. I want to be that kind of smart. Not wistfully, factually. The way she stated all her intentions as established conclusions rather than wishes." "You already are," Wyatt said. "You just need time to grow into it." Junie looked at him sideways. The expression was not quite skeptical and not quite satisfied. The expression of a person filing a statement under review pending further evidence. Then she went back to her piece of bread, and Wyatt went back to watching the dark, and Wesley refilled the canteens at the creek without being asked. Tess fell asleep sitting up against a flat rock, and nobody mentioned it because some things were more important than dignity. They rode into Cheyenne at 9:30 in the morning, with the city coming up around them gradually, the way cities did on the plain. First the smell of it, then the sound, then the edges of buildings against the sky. Wyatt had not been to Cheyenne in 2 years. The cemetery where Eliza was buried lay on the north side of town, and he had not gone north of 16th Street since 1882, because going north meant making a decision he had not yet been ready to make. He went north today. He did not stop at the cemetery, but he passed within 4 blocks of it, and he tipped his hat once very slightly in the direction of the headstone he could not see, and he said nothing aloud, because there was nothing aloud that needed to be said. Eliza would understand. Eliza had always understood. Clement Street was in the Federal District 3 blocks east of the Territorial Courthouse, in a building that announced its official nature with the specific architecture of government. Solid, rectangular, deeply uninterested in being welcoming. A United States Marshal's Office seal was mounted beside the door in brass that somebody polished regularly. Wyatt swung down. He tied his horse. He lifted Tess down from the saddle, and she made a small sound of protest at being woken, but stood on her own feet without complaint. Junie dismounted on her own before he could reach her, the way she did everything for herself, unless asking for help was strictly necessary. "You two stay close to me," Wyatt said. "Do not say anything unless someone speaks to you directly." "And if someone speaks to us directly," Junie said, "then say exactly what you know. Not what you think they want to hear. Not what you think will help. Exactly what you know. The truth does not need any help being the truth." Junie considered this, then took her sister's hand and stood very straight. Both of them looking at the federal building with the focused readiness of soldiers about to walk into something they had decided to walk into regardless of outcome. Wyatt put his hand on the door and opened it. The clerk inside was a young man with ink-stained fingers and the expression of a person who managed the distance between the public and the marshal as a matter of professional responsibility. He looked up when Wyatt came in, looked at the two small girls behind him, and the professional expression shifted into something more uncertain. "My name is Wyatt Calder," Wyatt said. "I am a former justice of the peace out of Cheyenne. I have documented evidence of multiple homicides committed under color of law in Redstone County, Wyoming, with connections to a land acquisition conspiracy involving members of the territorial government." He set his hat on the counter. "Tell Marshal Halloran that Silas Mercer sent me. He will know the name." The clerk looked at him. He looked at the girls. He picked up his hat and went through the inner door without saying anything, which Wyatt figured was the best possible response to that particular introduction. They waited 4 minutes. Then the inner door opened, and a man came through it who was not the clerk. He was perhaps 60, broad through the shoulders, the kind of face that had seen enough of the world's business to have stopped being surprised by most of it. He wore a federal marshal's badge and an expression of contained, focused attention. He looked at Wyatt. He looked at the girls. He looked at Wyatt again. "Silas Mercer," he said. His voice was even and gave nothing away. "Silas Mercer has been dead since May." "He has been dead since May," Wyatt confirmed. "His work has not been." Garrett Halloran looked at the two girls for a long moment, and something moved in his face that he did not try to conceal. A brief, unguarded thing that was there and gone before Wyatt could name it precisely, but that lived in the neighborhood of grief. "Come back," Halloran said. He had a private office with a door that closed and 2 extra chairs that he pulled around himself without being asked. He waited until everyone was seated, and then he looked at Wyatt and said, "Tell me." Wyatt told him. He went through it in the order it had happened, starting with the girls in the alley and working forward through Maybelle and Dr. Holloway and the tin box and the documents and Thorne's response and the canyon and the ride. He took the oilcloth packet from inside his coat, lining the one he had sewn shut with Eliza's old needles 2 nights before, and he placed it on Halloran's desk. He described Wesley Trent's witness testimony and the names Obadiah Boone and Tobias Avery. He named the 2 territorial government men in Silas's documents and described the payment records. Halloran listened without interrupting. He was the kind of listener who made you feel that every word was being filed with precision, that nothing was being lost. He picked up the documents when Wyatt was done and read through them with the focused efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for. The room was quiet. Tess had climbed into the extra chair and tucked her feet under her and was watching Halloran with the focused attention she gave to all adults who were deciding important things. Junie sat very straight beside her, hands in her lap. "The 2 names in the territorial office," Halloran said without looking up. "Beaumont and Crane." He turned a page. "I have had concerns about Senator Beaumont for 8 months. Not enough to move on. Silas Mercer built me what I needed." He set the document down. He looked at Wyatt. "The question is Thorne. He was behind us in the canyon. I do not know if he came through or went back. If he went back to Redstone, he is destroying evidence and relocating. If he came through, he might be an hour behind us, or less." "Then we move today," Halloran said. He stood. He was a man who made decisions the way a carpenter drove nails, completely, without second-guessing the swing. "I'm going to need a written statement from you and from Mr. Trent. The witness testimony from Boone and Avery will be taken in Redstone with federal protection in place." He paused. He looked at the girls. "And I am going to need statements from them. Whatever they heard, whatever they saw, all of it." Junie looked at him steadily. "We will tell you everything we know," she said. "We have been waiting to tell someone since May." Halloran looked at her for a moment. Something gentled at the very edge of his eyes that Wyatt would not have noticed if he had not been watching for it. "Your father was a brave man, Miss Mercer," Halloran said. Junie's jaw did its considering movement. "He was the best man," she said. It was the same phrase said in the same tone that she had probably been saying to herself every day since May, to keep it true by repetition. He was trying to do the right thing. He did it, Halloran said. What he built got here. That is what matters. He sent 2 deputies out of the building within 20 minutes with instructions. Wyatt did not hear, but could infer from the purposeful speed with which the men moved. He had a 3rd deputy take Wesley Trent to a separate room to begin his written statement. He sat across from Wyatt in his private office with the door closed and said, "Tell me about Thorne, not the documents. Tell me how he operates, the texture of it." Wyatt told him about the polished badge, about the calibrated smile, about the man in the brown coat who had followed him home, about the patience of a man who had let hungry children survive in an abandoned barn for 4 months because removing them actively was more visible than letting the problem solve itself. He told Halloran about the way Thorne had stopped him on the street with the perfect warmth of a man who thought he was in control, and how that certainty had been the tell. The specific arrogance of someone who had operated without consequence for long enough to believe consequence was no longer a possibility. Halloran listened. "He is going to run," he said when Wyatt was done. "Men like him, the smart ones, they have exit plans. He will have money somewhere and a direction already decided. The question is whether he believes he still has time." "He does not know I made it to you." "Not yet." The outer door opened. One of the deputies came back moving faster than he had left. He knocked on the office door and came in without waiting. "Marshal, Sheriff Thorne is in Cheyenne. He came in on the North Road an hour ago. 3 men with him. He went to the territorial courthouse." The room went tight. "Senator Beaumont," Wyatt said. "He is going to Beaumont," Halloran confirmed. He stood. "He knows we have the documents, or he suspects it. He is trying to get ahead of us through the territorial system before I can move through the federal." He was already reaching for his hat. "He is fast." "So are you," Wyatt said. Halloran looked at him with the level attention of a man who had decided something. "You said you served 11 years on the bench." "I did." "Your credentials are still valid in the Wyoming Territory." Wyatt understood where this was going. "They are." "Then you are a federal officer of the court for the next 6 hours," Halloran said. "I need somebody I trust at this building while I am at the courthouse. Somebody who will keep those children safe regardless of what comes through that door." He looked at the 2 girls. Junie looked at Wyatt. The measuring quality in her eyes was different from the quality she had used in the alley behind the Iron Creek Saloon 4 days earlier. It was not measuring whether he was safe anymore. It was measuring whether he was ready. "We will be all right," Junie said to Wyatt, not to Halloran, telling him, not asking. "I know you will," Wyatt said. Halloran was out the door in under a minute with 2 deputies behind him and instructions to the remaining clerk that nobody entered the building without his authorization. Wyatt locked the front door himself. He stood in the empty front room of a federal marshal's office with 2 4-year-old girls and the late morning light pressing against the windows, and the whole careful structure of Silas Mercer's truth finally in the hands of a man who could act on it. Tess came and stood beside him. She put her hand into his the same way she had done it on that first morning in the alley, like it had already been decided. He held on. "Is it almost over?" she asked. He thought about what honest looked like right now. He thought about Thorne in the territorial courthouse moving fast through a system he had bought piece by piece over years, trying to get in front of something that had already gotten in front of him. He thought about Halloran moving through the same building from the federal side with Silas's documentation and the weight of 11 months of parallel investigation behind him. "The hard part is almost over," he said. "Some of the rest of it takes time. Courts take time. Testimony takes time. But the part where you are hungry and alone and nobody knows what happened to your parents, that part is done." Tess looked up at him. Her face was thin. Her eyes were older than they should have been. She was 4 years old. She had eaten garbage pail biscuits. She had survived a canyon. She had ridden through the Wyoming dark without complaint. She was still underneath all of it, a child who wanted somebody to tell her it was going to be all right. "Promise," she said. He thought about Eliza, who had never made promises she was not prepared to die keeping. He thought about what it meant to say a word like that to a child who had learned that the world broke its words without much difficulty. "I promise," he said, and he meant it with everything he had left to mean anything with, which after 5 years of building walls had turned out to be more than he had known. Junie came and stood on his other side. She did not take his hand. She just stood there close enough that her shoulder was against his arm, and looked at the locked front door with the same steady attention she gave to everything she had decided to stand in front of. They waited. An hour passed, then another. The clerk at the outer desk brought them water and hardtack without being asked, and Tess ate, and Junie monitored the windows with the systematic patience that was simply her nature. And Wyatt sat in a federal marshal's chair with his hat in his hands and thought about the shape a life could take when you stopped trying to manage it from behind walls and just walked toward the thing that needed doing. The door opened at 3:30 in the afternoon. Halloran came in first. His face was composed, but there was something different in it, something settled that had not been there when he left. Behind him, in the custody of 2 federal deputies, was Sheriff Asa Thorne of Redstone County, Wyoming. His hat was gone. His hands were bound in front of him with iron cuffs. His badge, that polished silver badge, was gone from his chest. And without it, he looked like what he was, a man at the end of something, standing in the particular stillness of a person who had run out of moves and was rearranging his face to hide it. He looked at Wyatt when he came through the door. He looked at the 2 girls. Something moved in his face for just a moment, something that might have been calculation and might have been something older and darker, and then it was gone behind the same careful composure he had worn on that Redstone street when he had asked Wyatt about the children with his hat in his hand. Beaumont tried to move the documents into a county proceeding, Halloran said to Wyatt without looking at Thorne. "He did not know I had already filed them under federal jurisdiction this morning before I left to go after him. By the time he and his men understood what had happened, the arrest warrant was already signed." He paused. "Senator Beaumont is in federal custody. Judge Crane surrendered voluntarily an hour ago in exchange for cooperation." He looked at Thorne with the flat, complete attention of a man filing a final piece of information in its appropriate location. "This one did not surrender voluntarily." Thorne looked at Wyatt. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what you have set in motion. The company has resources. A federal marshal's office in Cheyenne does not have the reach to address. This is not finished because you got me into a pair of cuffs." "No," Wyatt agreed. "It is not. But it started, and starting is what your system counted on never happening." Thorne looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked at Junie and Tess, and for just a second something crossed his face that might have been the closest thing to shame a man like Asa Thorne was capable of producing. Junie looked back at him with the steady, unafraid attention she had given to every threat she had ever faced. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The deputies moved Thorne through to the back of the building. Halloran watched him go. Then he turned to Wyatt. "The company itself will take longer," he said. "There are men above Thorne and above Beaumont who have lawyers and resources and who will spend the next year trying to manage this." He looked at the documents on his desk. "But Silas Mercer named them, every one of them. His record is clean and specific and corroborated now by Wesley Trent's witness testimony, and by the statements I will take from Dr. Holloway and from those 2 miners. It will hold." "It will hold," Wyatt said. Junie looked up at him. Her chin was at the precise angle she held it when she was containing something too large for her face to comfortably show. "They will know what happened to Bappa," she said. "And to Mama. People will know it was not accidents." "People will know," Wyatt said. She nodded. One nod, tight and deliberate. Then she looked at the window and breathed, and Wyatt watched her, let go of something she had been holding since May, some portion of the weight that had been requiring her to be harder and more careful and more relentlessly prepared than any 4-year-old on the earth should ever have to be. She did not weep. Junie Mercer did not yet know how to weep for things she had decided to be strong about. That would come later in its own time when there was enough safety in the world around her that she could afford to. Tess wept, quietly, without drama, leaning against Wyatt's arm with her eyes closed and her tears running without sound, the specific weeping of a child who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally been given permission to put it down. Wyatt put his arm around her. He held on. He looked at Junie, who was looking at her sister with an expression that contained everything she was not letting herself feel, yet all of it present behind her eyes. He understood that these two children were going to need a very long time and a great deal of steadiness to become who they were going to be on the other side of this. He understood, with the quiet certainty of a man who had finally stopped arguing with what he knew to be true, that he intended to be there for all of it. Eliza, he thought, I have not been alone in this room for half an hour now, and I am not going to be alone in any room going forward. He thought she would not mind. He thought she would in fact be pleased. The trials took 4 months. That was the part nobody told you about when you imagined justice, that it moved the way rivers moved through flat country, with purpose but without hurry, and that the waiting was its own kind of work that required a different kind of endurance than the running had. Wyatt stayed in Cheyenne for the first 2 weeks because Halloran needed him available for federal proceedings and because there was nowhere else that made sense to be. He found a boarding house on a quiet street run by a woman named Mrs. Alcott, who had a room with 2 narrow beds and no opinion at all about the fact that a 54-year-old former justice of the peace was apparently the guardian of 2 4-year-old girls who showed up at her breakfast table every morning and ate with the focused efficiency of people who had learned not to take meals for granted. Mrs. Alcott put extra biscuits on the table the second morning without being asked. She did not explain why. She did not need to. Wyatt thanked her with a nod, and she nodded back, and that was the whole of it. Mrs. Alcott had also, on the first night, taken Tess upstairs and washed and properly dressed the cuts on the small girl's feet, and produced a pair of soft cotton socks from somewhere that fit a 4-year-old child without questions asked. By the 3rd morning, Tess was walking without a limp. By the 5th, she was running. Junie ate 3 biscuits. Tess ate 2 and put 1 in the pocket of her dress. Wyatt looked at the pocket. He looked at Tess. She met his eyes with the steady directness she had had since the first morning in the alley. You do not have to save it, he said. There will be more tomorrow. Tess looked at the biscuit-shaped lump in her pocket. She looked at Wyatt. She did not take the biscuit out, but she put her hand flat over it for a moment as if she were taking the fact of it in through her palm. Something in her face shifted in a way that was too small to name and too significant to miss. Tomorrow, she said, testing the word. Tomorrow, and the day after that. And the one after that one too. She left the biscuit in her pocket that morning. The next morning she put a biscuit on her plate and ate all of it before she put anything in her pocket. The morning after that, she did not put anything in her pocket at all. She ate breakfast and then looked up at Wyatt and said, "Can I have another one?" with the directness of a child who had just discovered that asking was a thing that worked. "Yes," Wyatt said. He watched her take a second biscuit and eat all of it without saving any of it, and he felt something happen in his chest that he did not try to name. Naming it would have required him to excuse himself from the breakfast table, and he did not want to do that. Wesley Trent came by twice during those weeks, both times with his reporter's notebook, both times leaving it in his coat pocket, which Wyatt appreciated more than he said. The young man had a good instinct for when the story needed to wait, and when the people in it needed to just be people. He sat at Mrs. Alcott's kitchen table and drank coffee and talked to Junie about the canyon with the genuine curiosity of a man who had gone through it himself and still was not entirely sure how the smaller of the 2 people in his company had navigated it better than he had. "The smooth side," Junie said again with the patient repetition of a person explaining something to an adult who should have understood it the first time. "I know," Wesley said. "I just still cannot believe you read it in the dark." "It is easier in the dark," Junie said. "You use your hands more." Wesley wrote something in his notebook before he remembered he had decided not to. Then he looked at it and put the notebook back in his pocket. Junie watched him do it. "You can write it down," she said, "if you're going to write about what happened." "I'm going to write about it," Wesley said carefully. "When the trials are finished, your parents' names are going to be in the record. People are going to know what your father did." Junie looked at the table for a long moment. Then she looked up. "Make sure they know about Mama too," she said. "She went to Dr. Holloway with those documents knowing what might happen. That was brave. That should be in the record." Wesley looked at her. "It will be," he said. "I promise." Junie nodded. One nod, filed and accepted. Obadiah Boone and Tobias Avery came to Cheyenne in the third week of Wyatt's stay there, brought in by two of Halloran's deputies under federal escort, with the careful handling of men who were afraid and doing something brave anyway. Wyatt met them in the hallway outside the federal proceedings room. Boone was a large man who carried his fear in his hands, which he kept moving without purpose, gripping and releasing the brim of his hat. Avery was smaller and went very still when he was frightened, which Wyatt recognized. "You do not have to do anything," Wyatt told them, "except say what you saw. Silas Mercer already built a case. What you have is corroboration. You are not carrying this alone." Boone looked at him. "We were there," he said. "We saw the supports go. They did not fail on their own. Somebody had cut them halfway through clean on the load-bearing side so they would hold until the shift started and then give under the weight." His voice had the texture of something that had been kept under pressure for months and was only now being allowed to move. "Silas Mercer walked into that shaft because he trusted it was safe, because it was a county claim and he had no reason to believe the county would kill him." He stopped. "He had two little girls at home. He told me about them. He said Junie could already read sign better than most grown men." Wyatt stood in that hallway, with Obadiah Boone's grief pressing against the air between them, and he thought about Junie at 4 years old, reading canyon walls in the dark, navigating by landmarks her father had taught her, carrying the weight of knowing something terrible for months without letting it crush her. "She can," Wyatt said. "She's remarkable. Silas would have been proud." "I am sorry," Boone said. His voice broke on the last word and did not recover immediately. He stood there with his hat in his hands and let it be broken. "I am sorry I did not come forward sooner. I was scared of Thorne. I was scared of what he would do to my family. You are here now," Wyatt said. "Silas built something that could wait for you. He understood that fear was real. He planned for it. Go in there and say what you saw. That is all." They went in. They said what they saw. Halloran came out afterwards to where Wyatt was waiting on a bench and said, "That is the last piece. The case is complete." Dr. Ezra Holloway came to Cheyenne in the same week. He came alone on the morning train, dressed in the clean dark suit of a man who had not had a drink in 11 days. His hands were steadier than Wyatt remembered. He gave his testimony to Halloran in a clear voice that did not falter, and afterwards he asked very quietly whether he might be permitted to speak to the Mercer girls. Wyatt thought about it. Then he brought him to Mrs. Alcott's kitchen. Holloway stood with his hat in his hands and looked at Tess and Junie and said, "I told your mother no when she came to me. I have carried that every day since." His voice did not break, but it was working hard. "I cannot give it back to her. I would if I could. I am here to tell you that what I have left to give in this lifetime, you may have if you want it." Junie watched him with the level attention she gave to all serious adults. Tess looked at him for a long moment. Then she said in the small, clear voice she used for the things that mattered, "Mama trusted you. She was usually right about people. I think she knew you would keep the papers. I think she knew you were a good man who got lost." Dr. Holloway closed his eyes. He stood there in Mrs. Alcott's kitchen with his hat in his hands, and a 4-year-old girl had just given him the absolution that no court and no liquor and no 11 nights of sober sleep had been able to give him. And he received it the way a man receives a thing he has not earned but desperately needs. "Thank you, Miss Mercer," he said. "You are welcome. Tess said. Sheriff Asa Thorne's federal trial took 6 days. Wyatt attended every one of them because Halloran had asked him to, and because he wanted to see it through with his own eyes, rather than hear about it second-hand. Thorne sat at the defendant's table with the same composed attention he had worn on that Redstone Street, the same careful calibration of expression, but the room had the documents and the testimony and the specific weight of federal proceedings behind it, and composure without a foundation was just a man sitting quietly while the walls came down around him. He was found guilty on 7 counts. Senator Whitfield Beaumont on 4. Judge Lemuel Crane on 2 reduced counts in exchange for full cooperation, which was the kind of compromise that satisfied nobody entirely and served the outcome practically. Wyatt had been in the justice system long enough to understand the difference between perfect and sufficient. That night after the verdicts were read, after the courthouse had emptied, and the streets of Cheyenne had gone quiet, in the way streets go quiet when the dust of a long argument has settled, Wyatt walked back to Mrs. Alcott's boarding house in the cold autumn dark, and he stood at the foot of the stairs that led up to the rooms, and he thought about the sealed envelope he had been carrying in his coat since the night he and the girls had pulled it from beneath the kitchen floor of the Mercer house 4 months earlier. He had not opened it. He had put it on a high shelf in the room he shared with the girls behind a folded blanket where it would not be disturbed. He had told himself a dozen times that he would know when it was right to open it. He had told himself once that maybe it was not for him to open at all. But Hannah Mercer had written it with the children in mind, and the children this evening had earned what was inside. He went up the stairs. He took the envelope down from the shelf. He brought it down to Mrs. Alcott's kitchen, and he set it on the kitchen table, and he asked Mrs. Alcott if she might give him the kitchen for a half-hour. Mrs. Alcott was a woman of some perception. She put on her shawl and went out for a walk and said she would knock when she came back. He called the girls down. They came down in their night clothes, Junie first, Tess behind her half asleep, one small hand wrapped in the back of Junie's nightdress. They saw the envelope on the table and they stopped. "This is from your mother," Wyatt said. "She wrote it the night before she died. I have not opened it. It is yours, and it has been yours all along. You can read it now, or you can read it later, or you can read it when you are grown. There is no wrong time." Junie looked at her sister. Tess looked at the envelope. She was awake now. "Now," Junie said. Wyatt took down a small knife and slit the envelope open at the top, very carefully, the way he would slit open a letter from somebody whose handwriting he loved. He handed the page to Junie because the eldest reads first when there are letters from a mother. Junie unfolded the page. Her hands were steady. Her eyes moved down the page. Then she handed it across the table to Wyatt and said in a voice so small it almost was not there, "Will you read it out loud so Tess can hear too?" Wyatt took the page. He cleared his throat once. He read, "To whoever by the providence of God comes to find my children. If you are reading this letter, then I am not there to read it to them, and you are. I want to say first that I am sorry. I am sorry that you have walked into a story not of your making and have been asked to carry a piece of it. I am sorry that 2 small girls are now your concern. I would not wish that on a stranger, but strangers are sometimes the answer to a prayer that the people praying it cannot see the shape of yet, and so I am going to ask you this anyway." His voice held, just barely. "Junie is my older girl by half an inch and a great deal of stubbornness. She is going to test you. She is going to watch you for a long time before she lets you in. Do not take it personally. She loves the way her father loved. Slowly. Once. For keeps. If she lets you in, you have been let in for the rest of her life, and you must be worthy of it. Tess is my younger girl. She is the one who will reach for your hand first. Do not be fooled by it. She is reaching because she has decided about you, not because she does not know better. Tess decides quickly, and she is always right. If she has put her hand in yours, you may proceed. I do not know your name. I do not know your face. I know that you will be tired when you find them. I know that you will probably be alone in your own life, because the people who answer prayers like this one are usually people who have lost a great deal and have not figured out yet what to do with the room their loss has made. Use the room, sir, or madam. Use the room. My girls are good girls. They will not be a burden. They will in time be the best thing that has ever happened to whatever life you thought you had. Wyatt had to stop here. He set the letter down on the table for a moment. He did not look at the girls. He looked at the wall above the stove, which had a small embroidered sampler on it that Mrs. Alcott had made 20 years before, and he held very still. Then he picked the letter up and finished it. Tell them, when they are old enough to understand it, that their mother and father loved them with everything they had, and that everything they had turned out to be enough. Tell them their father died because he believed the truth has more roads than a lie does. Tell them their mother died because she believed the same thing. Tell them that the believing was right. And tell them, sir, that if you have come to love them, you may. They have room. There is no jealousy in the dead. There is only the hope that those we have left behind will not be left behind for long. Faithfully, yours in trust, Hannah Mercer. The kitchen was very quiet. Tess began to cry first, without sound. The way she cried. Junie did not cry. Junie sat very still and looked at the table, and her chin was at the high quarter inch, and her eyes were bright, and her hands were folded in her lap. Wyatt folded the letter. He put it carefully back into its envelope. He set it in the center of the table between them. She loved you very much, he said quietly. We know, Junie said. I want you to know, Wyatt said, that whatever you decide about me in your own time is fine with me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not in a hurry. The room your mother spoke of in this letter, I have it. It is yours in whatever shape you want it to take for as long as you want it. Junie looked at him. The measuring quality was there in her eyes one last time, and then it was gone. And what was left underneath it was just a 4-year-old girl looking at a man across a kitchen table at the end of a long, long road. Mr. Calder, she said. Yes, Junie. We have decided. She did not say what they had decided. She let the words sit between them. Wyatt nodded once the small, tight nod he had learned from her, and the matter was settled. The day after Thorne's verdict, Wyatt walked back to Mrs. Alcott's boarding house in the late afternoon and found Junie and Tess in the small yard behind her kitchen. They had apparently decided that the flower bed along the south wall needed attention and had spent the afternoon doing something constructive about it. Junie was on her knees in the dirt with a stick she had sharpened into something resembling a tool. Tess was bringing her things in the methodical way she had, small contributions made with large seriousness. Beside Junie on a piece of clean cloth lay a small bundle of cuttings. Mabel Carver had put them on the train from Redstone 2 days earlier with a short note that said, "Only. These are from Hannah's roses. I cut them before the house came down. I have been keeping them for 2 years for somebody who would know what to do with them. I think I have found her." Junie had not said anything when Wyatt read her the note. She had only nodded once, the small, tight nod that was her way of accepting a thing too large to thank somebody for, and she had set the cuttings beside her bed that night and slept with one hand on the cloth. "Well," Junie said now without looking up. "Guilty," Wyatt said. Junie sat back on her heels. She looked at the turned earth in front of her. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything, and Wyatt stood behind her and let her have the silence, because some things needed to be met quietly before they could be spoken. "Will he go to prison?" Tess asked. "For a long time." Tess put down the small stones she had been collecting and stood up straight and looked at Wyatt with those light eyes that had seen too much and were slowly, day by day, beginning to look like the eyes of a child again. "Good," she said. Simple, complete. The way she said things when the thing itself was simple and complete. Junie turned around. Her face had the look it got when she was containing something too large for her expression to comfortably hold. Her chin was at the high angle. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were bright in a way they did not usually get. "Papa said it would work," she said. "He said if the truth has enough roads to travel, it gets where it is going. He said that to Mama once, when she was scared. She paused. I did not know what it meant then. I was too small. You know now, Wyatt said. Yes, Junie said. I know now. She looked down at the bundle of cuttings on the cloth. She picked one of them up very carefully, holding it the way a person holds something that has been kept alive on purpose by the patience of a stranger. Mr. Calder, she said. She did not look up. Yes. Will you help me plant them? It was the first time she had asked him for help with something that was not strictly necessary. The first time she had asked because she wanted, rather than because she needed. Wyatt went down on one knee in the late October dirt beside her, and his old knees complained the way they always complained, and he did not care. Yes, Miss Mercer, he said. I will. They worked together in the long autumn light, Wyatt turning the soil deep the way Mabel's note had told him to, and Junie placing each cutting with the precision she applied to everything, and Tess sitting on the kitchen step, offering opinions that nobody had asked for, which was increasingly her nature, now that she had enough safety in the world around her to have opinions at all. That one is crooked, Tess said. It is not crooked, Junie said. It is a little crooked. Junie looked at the cutting. She adjusted it with two small fingers. Fine, she said. You should always listen to me, Tess said. I have good eyes. You have opinions, Junie said. It is not the same thing. Wyatt pressed the soil around the base of the last cutting with both hands and sat back on his heels, and he looked at the row of them along the south wall, small and provisional in the turned earth. Nothing to look at yet. Just potential waiting for time and water, and the particular stubbornness of things that had been planted by people who intended them to grow. Junie looked at them beside him. Her face was quiet and full in a way it had not been quiet and full before. They will grow, she said. They will. They will need time. First year, they just establish roots. You might not see much. That is all right, Junie said. I know how to wait. He looked at her. This child who had waited through a Wyoming summer in an abandoned barn, and waited through a canyon with men behind her, and waited through 4 months of federal proceedings with a patience that would have broken most adults, and who was now kneeling in a borrowed garden in the late October sun, prepared to wait for roses to decide they were ready. She turned and looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that he had not seen there before. Not the measuring quality, not the careful assessment. Something simpler and harder to name, something that lived in the same neighborhood as peace, that had not arrived fully yet, but had sent word ahead that it was coming. Mr. Calder, she said. Junie. She looked at the roses for a moment, then she looked back at him. Thank you. Plain and without ornamentation. The way she said the things that mattered most, because she had learned from her mother that the truest things did not need decoration. He put his hand very lightly on the top of her head, the way a person touches something they intend to take care of for as long as they are able. Thank you, Junie, he said back, and he meant every syllable of it, for the brass button on the crate and the carved stone on his table and the small hand reaching up for his in the alley dust. For being found by 2 little girls who had needed someone and choosing him with the terrifying and absolute confidence of children who had run out of other options and had decided against every reason the world had given them to be careful to trust again. Tess came off the kitchen step and walked across the yard and sat down in the dirt beside them without any apparent concern for the dress Mrs. Alcott had given her that morning. The 3 of them sat together in the late autumn Cheyenne sun, beside Hannah Mercer's roses, and the city went on around them in the ordinary way of cities, and somewhere in a federal cell across town, the men who had built their fortunes on dead miners and frightened widows were beginning the long, quiet work of paying for what they had done. And somewhere in a Wyoming graveyard, a woman named Eliza Calder, who had spent 17 years loving a man with everything she had, was at last, Wyatt thought, content with what her husband had done with the room her absence had left him. Eliza, he thought. We are 3 now. And then he amended it gently because honest was important and accuracy mattered. Eliza, we are 4. The rest of the work was waiting for them. He could feel a letter on its way already from Halloran's office, the kind of letter that said there was another family in another town where a sheriff smiled too carefully and a doctor drank too much and 2 children hid in a barn and waited for someone to come. But that was for tomorrow. This afternoon was for the flower bed. He sat on his heels in the late October dirt with a small girl leaning against his arm and the older one at work beside him, and he closed his eyes for a moment and he listened to the quiet sounds of his life being put back together by hands that were not his. The walls were down. He understood, finally come home.